I did some research on the art and animation styles and learned that this technique, well known as hyperrealism, a style intended to give the tense, lifelike detail using the traditional, non-digital art methods. Some pieces of the genre was almost indistinguishable from the photographs. The line wasn't quite realistic, as you could already easily tell, though it was just a cartoon. Yet it was somehow visualizing striking as the real photo of a lion. I continued my research, now focusing on finding people who were knowledgeable about this art form. I narrowed my research down to a few academics and animators and emailed them about the lion still. I got a response from the expert of the style reminded of Johann and Strauba, the Austrian artist and animator who had moved to the United States in the 1930s. He had worked for Disney for briefly before starting his own animation studio. He was known for his bizarre deconstructionist and approach to animation, and started his own little anti-art movement of shorts. Animators and cartoonists trained at his studio produced by their own bizarre works, which often included violent and grotesque themes. Despite that, the studio absolutely marketed to the children. The email that went on to explain about the Strobe became more aggressively obsessed with the magic and conclude with during his career. It became less and less functional at his studio and was forced to close due to bankruptcy. Curiously, the studio was all known to produce only a handful of original works of his own. Apparently, the animators had spent a lot of time deconstructing and replicating the works of other companies, mainly Disney, since they were the only major animation studio at the time, and alternating them to make surreal or disturbing. This would have opened their company up to privacy claims, although except that they were never sold such as works to the public, instead gifting them with a handful of collectors with the Anti-Art Elite Company. Strobe had self-published a book, manual of source, and all contained prints of some of his still cartoons and instructions of his technique. It was simply titled Animation Deconstructional. Now I immediately determined to read it, but it took me ages to find a copy. I managed to track one down at the public library headquarters 3 states away. The book was in their special archive section, so I couldn't get it through their interlibrary loan. I had to drive there, where they would allow me to examine it to archive reading room. The room was in sparse, dusty, and poorly lit. It had to be at least the 1950s police interrogation room. I was allowed to read the book in the interest of the single table, under the supervision of the librarian. It was yellowed and the jacket was wrapping around protective plastic. The volume was short enough to read in an hour. Strobely was not really good at English as he was with drawing, but the self-published aspect really showed the numerous grammar errors. As a couple of dozen prints of the book, he made his unique hyperrealistic style. Again, they weren't really photorealistic, unlike the other artists in genre, but they had the depth of the detail and perspective that made them appear alive and the same. None of them did anything paranormal or anything like that, but there was one that managed to seriously frighten me. It was a cartoon snake, a cobra, with its fangs and beard and even menacing look in its eyes. You know some of the paintings of people with their eyes painted in such a way that give the impression of the subject's gaze following you as if you view it from of different angles? Well, this piece didn't do that, but it had some similar things going on with the eyes of the snake that appeared to be bored right into your straight through the page. I liked the fact that the snake was going to strike up and dig its fangs into my arm, but I didn't have the trippy experiences like the lion animation. But it was still surreal and unnerving. In addition to the sections and art technique, Strobe had also included number seemingly random place critiques of the state animators that could generously be described as educated rants. A frequent target of his criticisms was Walt Disney, who had declared as the amateur buffoon who was holding back the animation medium from its true potential. The author went on, emphasizing that the need to be bold and daring animation and willing to push the social taboos. I returned to the volume to the librarian. I hadn't discovered anything that would help me with my search of the Aristocats tape, but at least I had come away with such interesting insights to the philosophy of the man who may have been behind it all. My next step was to visit the Strobe studio, which involved yet another cross-country road trip. I started to wonder on how much gas money I would have ended up by spending by the end of the research that had damned the video. What was really creepier than flying? Or what was cheaper than that? At least the studio was still standing though. I arrived there anticipating of anything of major interest that would looted decades ago. Still, I held out hope and pulled on the shopping cart of the parking lot. The rest of my journey would have to be on foot, since the studio predicts in modern roads. I crossed the interstate, and there would only be a light traffic, and found by the old dirt and what could have been the sole source of vehicle traffic. Back then, by now, it was largely overgrown. I cursed myself for not bringing the machete. It took me about 2 hours to reach the location. It was one-story wooden building, with its windows boarded up and foliage growing all around it. I walked to the premier tier, looking for a way in that wouldn't open me up any charges of breaking and entering, although I seriously doubt anyone would ever care that I have been there in my case. To my disappointment, no entry had been lifted than the previous urban explorers, and I had to hack my way through the boards with one window with the hatchet that I had bought. It might have been easier to smash down the door, but I felt somewhat less physical. There was, of course, no source of light except for now open windowway, but I had to foresight in to bring these free, high-powered LED lamps into my backpack, which I had now set up around the floor, relieved that I did not see any scurrying or slivering. The place seeming rather smaller inside, barely more suspicious than my basement at home. There was no furniture except for a couple of broken easels on the floor. Probably just sold off the tables and desks to pay off their debts, I thought. Some scuff marks were visible on the wooden floor, and there was even a low wooden partition that had been sectioned off of a small segment of the room. I guess this was where the administrator's desk would have been, while the rest of the floor was used for the actual animation work. Like I said, I hadn't been really the expecting one to find anything important, but it was still disappointing. I spent the next couple of hours placing around the floor, wondering if the whole road trip had been a waste of time and millage. I was about to pack up my lamps and leave, when I discovered a large trapdoor behind the door partition. I had taken off the lamp off the floor to perch it up on the door of the partition, and the light now allowed me to see the outline of the trapdoor, along with its hinges and the latch. The door was about 3 feet 2 feet by 2 feet, so I grew excited and opened it. Annoyingly, the door did not appear to have a mechanism for staying open, and it was too heavy for me to hold up, so I had to back out for the window back several times just to bring some rocks to prop it up, but the contents of the compartment were worth it. The compartment was only about a 3 feet drop, and it contained what appeared to be diagrams of animation or film devices, along with various little parts, knobs, bolts, lenses, and all scattered around the bottom. I studied these with fascination, but I couldn't really make heads or tails of this schematics. I tried fitting some of the parts together, but to no success. I decided against taking these items with me. I had to recognize that violating the law by entering this place unlawfully was worth pulling out a certain curtain on whatever had caused my childhood trauma. But these items were likely to be valuable at the end, thus stealing them for my own curiosity will go beyond bounds to justification. However, I did photograph each one of them, just in case.